Welcome, fellow historians, to Quiet Historians' Worlds. Before the grand empires and the written word, before the pyramids and the first cities, humanity existed for hundreds of thousands of years in a world of ice, fire, and immense silent landscapes. Our story today is a journey back to that world, to the very dawn of our consciousness. It's a story that lives not in books but in our bones, in the instincts that still guide us today. Have you ever sat by a campfire and felt a sense of peace you couldn't explain? Or felt a shiver of ancient fear in a dark forest? These feelings are echoes from the world we are about to enter. So as we travel back 30,000 years, I have a question for you. What part of our modern lives do you think still connects us to these ancient hunter-gatherer ancestors? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy these journeys into the deep past, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories from our shared human history. Your support makes these explorations possible. Now tell us, what kind of story should we explore next? For now, settle in, and let us begin our story at the edge of the great ice. The cold was the first and last god. It was an omnipresent entity, a silent, heavy pressure that lived in the marrow of the world. It shaped the mountains, cracked the stones, and dictated the very terms of existence. Inside the great cave, a cavernous mouth in the side of a snow-shrouded mountain, the Sun Chaser clan huddled in the last vestiges of the long glacial night. They were a small band, perhaps 30 souls in all, a flickering candle of humanity in an immense frozen darkness. The only thing that held the god of cold at bay was the fire. At the center of the main cavern, the heart fire burned, a pulsing, living creature of orange and red. It was never allowed to die. Its smoke, thick with the scent of pine resin and roasting meat from the previous night's meager catch, curled upwards towards the high, soot-blackened ceiling, a constant offering to the spirits of the air. Around this sacred warmth, the clan slept, their bodies wrapped in the heavy, stitched-together pelts of bear, wolf, and deer. They were a tangled mass of humanity, limbs intertwined, sharing warmth, their slow, rhythmic breaths misting in the frigid air. Kale awoke not to a sound, but to a feeling. It was a familiar stirring in his gut, a mix of gnawing hunger and the cold dread of anticipation. Today was the day of the great hunt. He was 18 summers old, his body lean and hard from a life of constant movement, but in the eyes of the clan, his manhood was not yet fully proven. He had hunted rabbit and deer, but he had never faced one of the true giants of the ice world, the great woolly mammoths they called the ice giants. Today that would change. He carefully extricated himself from the sleeping pile, his movements fluid and silent. His younger sister, barely a whisper of a presence beside him, did not stir. He pulled his thick wolf pelt cloak tighter around his bare shoulders and moved towards the fire. A few others were already awake. Bor, the clan leader and master of the hunt, sat staring into the flames. His face was a road map of a hard life, a latticework of scars and deep-set wrinkles. A long, jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, a permanent reminder of a close encounter with a cave lion in his youth. He held a spear in his hands, its fire-hardened wooden shaft smooth from years of use, its flint point a masterpiece of deadly craftsmanship. He looked up as Kale approached, and his gaze was as sharp and grey as a shard of flint. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. At the far side of the cavern, in a smaller alcove decorated with strange symbols painted in red ochre and charcoal, a different kind of power was awakening. Alara, the clan's shaman, was beginning her ritual. She was a woman of indeterminate age, her body bent and frail, but her eyes held a terrifying intensity, as if she could see through the world of flesh into the world of spirits. Her face was a mask of white clay, and she wore a cloak of raven feathers that seemed to drink the firelight. She began a low guttural chant, her voice a dry rasping sound like stones grinding together. She cast handfuls of dried herbs into a small fire, and a thick, acrid smoke filled the alcove. Her movements were slow, ancient, a dance of supplication and demand. She was speaking to the spirits of the hunt, to the soul of the great beast they sought, asking for its permission, for its sacrifice, so that the clan might live. The other hunters, now awake and gathering their weapons, watched her in silence. They did not need to understand her words, they understood her purpose. Their lives depended on her communion with the unseen world. Cale felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He picked up his own spear. It was a good spear, one he had made himself. The shaft was straight and balanced, the flint point sharp enough to shave hair, but it felt like a toy, a child's stick, when he thought of the creature it was meant to kill. An ice giant was a moving mountain of muscle and fur, armed with colossal curving tusks that could shatter a man's bones with a single toss. To hunt such a beast was an act of supreme, almost insane, courage. It was the ultimate test. Bor rose to his feet. The shaman's chant reached a crescendo, and then fell silent. The ritual was complete. Bor looked at the small group of hunters, 5 men in total, including Cale. They were the strength of the clan. He spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of absolute authority. The sun wakes, the ice giant walks south. We follow, for the clan. There were no more words. The hunters gathered their spears, their stone axes, and the small leather pouches containing dried meat and rendered fat for the journey. They moved towards the mouth of the cave. As Cale stepped out of the familiar warmth and into the pre-dawn world, the cold hit him like a physical blow. The landscape was a world of white and gray, an endless expanse of snow-covered plains and distant, jagged mountains. The sky was just beginning to bleed with the faint pale colors of the coming dawn. The air was so cold it felt sharp in his lungs. He looked out at the vast, silent and deadly beautiful world. Somewhere out there, the ice giant was waiting. The hunt had begun. For now, settle in, and let us begin our story at the edge of the great ice. The world beyond the cave was one of blinding white and profound silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of their hide-wrapped feet on the crisp snow and the whisper of the wind as it sculpted elegant flowing drifts across the vast plains. The sun, now fully risen, was a brilliant warm disk in a painfully blue sky, its light glinting off the endless sea of snow with a ferocity that made the hunters squint. Bor led them not with haste but with a deliberate, ground-eating pace. He moved with the certainty of a man reading a story written in the snow. To Cale, the landscape looked like a blank, featureless canvas. But to Bor it was a tapestry of information. He would pause, crouching low, his gloved hand hovering over a subtle depression in the snow. Here he would grunt, his voice a low rumble. The herd passed 2 sunrises ago. The wind has filled their tracks, but the ground remembers. He pointed to a clump of hardy wind-blasted shrubs. A few branches were broken, the wood splintered and fresh. They fed here. See how high the breaks are. The young ones were with them. Cale watched, his mind racing to absorb every lesson. He had been taught the basics of tracking since he was a boy, but watching Bor was like watching a master craftsman at work. The older man saw not just tracks but the story they told, the weight of the beasts, their speed, their direction, even their mood. He was in a silent dialogue with the landscape. Another hunter, Tarek, A man a few summers older than Cale, with a boisterous confidence that often bordered on arrogance, pointed to the north. The tracks lead toward the whispering pines. They will seek shelter there. Boar shook his head without looking up. No, the wind is from the north. They will not walk into it. They will follow the low ground where the wind is weakest. They are smart. Smarter than a hunter who thinks only of his own comfort. Tarek fell silent, a faint flush of embarrassment on his cheeks. Cale felt a small secret satisfaction. He respected Tarek's strength but was wary of his impulsiveness. On a hunt like this, a single rash decision could mean death for them all. They continued their silent trek for hours. The initial adrenaline of the departure had faded, replaced by the deep, aching cold and the gnawing emptiness in Cale's belly. He chewed on a small piece of dried meat from his pouch, the tough, sinewy flesh, a welcome, if unsatisfying, sensation. He focused on Boar's back, on placing his feet in the tracks the leader had already made, conserving every ounce of energy. The sun, despite its brilliance, offered little warmth against the persistent, searching wind. It was mid-morning when Boar suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. He held up a hand and the hunters froze behind him. Cale's heart hammered against his ribs. He followed Boar's gaze and at first saw nothing but the endless white. Then he saw it. A dark, misshapen lump on the snow several hundred paces away. It was a kill. They approached with extreme caution, spears at the ready. The air was still, and the scent of blood, sharp and metallic, was faint on the wind. It was the carcass of a young woolly rhino, its hide torn open, its entrails scattered across the snow in a gruesome frozen tableau. The snow around it was a chaos of churned-up prints. Boar knelt, his eyes scanning the scene with an almost scholarly intensity. "Cave lions," he said, pointing to a set of massive paw prints, "a pride of 3. They ambushed it here, at the rise. A fresh kill. They have eaten their fill, but they will not be far." Cale felt a new kind of fear, colder and sharper than his fear of the mammoth. The ice giant was a known quantity, a force of nature to be confronted with strategy and courage. Cave lions were different. They were the silent, unseen death that stalked the hunters themselves. They were ghosts of the snow, all muscle and claw and amber eyes. To stumble upon their territory was a deadly mistake. Boar rose and pointed to a different set of tracks, massive round depressions in the snow that dwarfed even the lion prints. "And here, our ice giant." He traced the path of the tracks. He came after the kill, a lone bull. Old, he smelled the blood and came to investigate. See how he turned away. He did not challenge the lions. He is old and he is alone. He was pushed from his herd. The news sent a jolt of excitement through the small group. A lone bull was exactly what they had hoped for. Hunting a full herd was suicide. Their protective instincts made them an impenetrable fortress of tusks and fury. But a lone bull, especially an old one, was a different proposition. It was still incredibly dangerous, but it was possible. "He is close," Boar said, his voice now imbued with a new urgency. "He left these tracks after the sun rose. The scent of the lions will have driven him south towards the frozen river. We must be quick, and we must be silent. The lions are watching." Cale felt his senses sharpen. The cold, the hunger, the fatigue, it all receded, replaced by a singular predatory focus. Every shadow now seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind a whisper of warning. The game had changed. They were no longer just hunters, they were also the hunted. He gripped his spear tighter, the smooth wood a comforting presence in his hand. He looked at Boars, who was already moving, his form blending into the stark white landscape. Cale followed, his every step now measured, his every breath controlled. The trail of the ice giant was now fresh, and it was leading them towards the confrontation they had sought since the cold dawn. As the hunters pushed deeper into the silent white world, a different kind of expedition was underway back at the Great Cave. The hunt for the ice giant was a spectacular gamble, a single throw of the dice that could result in either immense prosperity or devastating loss. But the clan's survival was not built on spectacle, it was built on the quiet, meticulous and constant work of its women. After the hunters had disappeared over the first ridge, the rest of the clan had stirred. The task of the day fell to the elder woman, Mala. Her face was as creased and intricate as a dried leaf, and her hands, though gnarled with age, moved with a practiced efficiency. She was the clan's memory, a living library of knowledge about which plants gave life, which healed sickness, and which brought a swift and silent death. She gathered the other women and the older children, a group of about 10 in all. Among them was Lyra, Cale's younger sister. She was 14 summers old, with her brother's lean build and her mother's quick, observant eyes. Where Cale was learning the loud, aggressive language of the hunt, Lyra was learning the quiet, subtle language of the land. "The sun is strong today," Mala said, her voice a low crackle like dry leaves. "The snow on the southern slopes will have melted back. The bloodroot will be showing. We need it for the fire sickness." She also assigned other tasks. Firewood, of course, was a constant necessity, as was the gathering of any edible mosses or lichens that could be scraped from the rocks. Their journey was the opposite of the hunters. They did not march out into the open plains. Instead, they moved into the relative shelter of the sparse, snow-laden pine forest that clung to the slopes of the mountain below the cave. They carried woven baskets and sharp-edged flint scrapers. Their movements were not a straight line of pursuit, but a meandering, deliberate search. Lyra walked beside Mala, her eyes scanning the ground. She was learning to see the world as the elder woman did. She learned to spot the tiny, almost invisible shoots of a winter green pushing up through a patch of melted snow. She learned that the gnarled bark of a particular pine, when boiled, could soothe a cough. This knowledge was a different kind of weapon, a different kind of power. It did not bring the glory of the hunt, but it was what kept the clan alive through the long, dark months of sickness and scarcity. "A hunter sees the big track," Mala told her, her voice low. "A gatherer sees the small leaf. Both are needed to see the whole world." Lyra found a patch of tough, fibrous roots near the base of a large, sun-warmed boulder. She knelt and began to dig with her scraper, the frozen ground hard and unforgiving. Her fingers, even through her hide mittens, quickly grew numb with cold. It was slow, painstaking work. For every handful of edible root, she had to move a mountain of frozen earth. As she worked, she thought of Cale. She pictured him out on the great empty plain, his spear in his hand. She felt a pang of worry, a cold knot in her stomach, that had nothing to do with the temperature. She knew the dangers he faced, but she also knew his purpose. He was hunting for the clan, and she, in her own quiet way, was doing the same. They worked for hours, slowly filling their baskets. The children, their faces red with cold, were tasked with gathering fallen branches for firewood, their laughter echoing briefly in the silent forest before being swallowed by the snow. The sun, climbing high in the sky, cast a brilliant warm light through the trees, making the snow-covered branches sparkle as if they were dusted with diamonds. The world was beautiful, but the beauty was deceptive. Lyra was scraping lichen from a rock face when a sudden, unnatural silence fell over the forest. The birdsong stopped, the rustling of the wind in the pines seemed to die away. The children's laughter had ceased. Lyra froze, her scraper held tight in her hand. She looked at Mala, whose head was cocked, her ancient eyes narrowed, listening. A low guttural cough echoed from deeper within the forest. It was a sound that made the blood run cold. It was not the sound of a deer or a wolf. It was heavy, powerful. It was the sound of a great cat. The cave lions. The hunters were not the only ones who had crossed their path today. The gatherers, with their children, were now in the heart of the lion's domain. Marla slowly raised a finger to her lips, her eyes wide with a silent, urgent command. Be still. Be invisible. The quiet work of gathering had just become a terrifying test of survival. The frozen river was a vast, glittering scar across the landscape. Boar led the hunters along the high ridge that overlooked the valley, their movements now as slow and deliberate as the advance of the glacier itself. Below them, nestled in a sparse grove of willows near the riverbank, was their quarry, the ice giant. It was even larger than Cale had imagined. It was a creature of immense primeval power. A thick, shaggy coat of dark brown fur covered its colossal body. Its domed head was crowned with a mat of even longer hair, and from its powerful jaw, two magnificent curving tusks of ivory, each longer than a man was tall, swept outwards, and then back in towards each other. It moved with a slow, ponderous grace, its massive column-like legs carrying its immense weight with an unnerving ease. It was using its tusks to clear snow from the ground, searching for the frozen grasses buried beneath. Cale's breath caught in his throat. It was the most magnificent and terrifying creature he had ever seen. The fear was a cold, hard knot in his chest, but alongside it, a strange sense of awe bloomed. This was one of the great spirits of the world, a true force of nature. Boar gestured for the hunters to gather. He spoke in a whisper, his voice barely disturbing the frigid air. He is old, his senses are dull, but he is still strong, stronger than all of us combined. We do not fight his strength, we fight his weakness. The plan was simple, ancient, and brutally effective. They would use the landscape itself as their weapon. The frozen river was their trap. Tarak, you and Ren take the high ground to the east, Boar commanded. You will make noise. Show yourselves, but stay out of reach. Drive him towards the river. Cale, you are with me. We will wait by the weak ice where the current still moves beneath. When he comes we strike the legs, we cripple him, then we finish him. Cale's heart pounded. He had been chosen to be at the point of greatest danger, the place where the killing blow would be struck. It was a sign of Boar's trust, a heavy and terrifying honor. He gave a single sharp nod. Tarak and Ren slipped away, moving like shadows through the snow-covered rocks. Cale and Boar, along with the fifth hunter, a quiet, steady man named Phelan, made their way down the steep slope towards the riverbank. Their movements careful to avoid dislodging any loose snow. They found the spot Boar had described. Here the river ice was thinner, its surface a darker, more translucent blue, and they could hear the faint gurgling sound of the current flowing beneath. They concealed themselves behind a jumble of ice-crusted boulders, their spears ready. Then they waited. The silence stretched, becoming taut and heavy. Cale's senses were screamingly alive. He could feel the cold seeping through his furs, the rough texture of his spear shaft, the hammering of his own heart. A shout echoed from the eastern ridge. It was Tarak. Another shout followed, this one from Ren. Cale could see them now, two small figures on the skyline, waving their arms and yelling. The great mammoth lifted its head, its small intelligent eyes turning towards the noise. It let out a low, rumbling growl of irritation. It began to move away from the annoyance, lumbering slowly, its path taking it, as Boar had predicted, directly towards the river. More shouts came from the ridge. Tarak, growing bolder, threw a rock that clattered down the slope near the beast. The mammoth's irritation turned to anger. It trumpeted, a deafening, soul-shaking blast of sound that rolled across the valley. It began to move faster, a lumbering trot that made the very ground tremble. "Steady," Ball whispered, his voice a low growl beside Cale. "Wait for my signal." The ice giant was coming. It was an avalanche of flesh and fury. The ground shook with its every step. It was closer now, so close that Cale could see the individual hairs on its shaggy coat, the glint of intelligence in its small red-rimmed eyes. It was not just a beast, it was an ancient living being, and its anger was a palpable force. It reached the edge of the river, its momentum carrying it onto the ice. It hesitated for a moment, testing the surface, but the shouts from behind drove it forward. It took another step, and another. "Now," Ball roared. The three hunters burst from their hiding place. The mammoth saw them, its eyes widening in surprise and rage. It turned to face them, lowering its massive head to bring its colossal tusks to bear, but it was too late. The ice, already groaning under the immense weight, gave way with a deafening crack. The mammoth's front legs plunged into the freezing water below. It let out a trumpeting scream of shock and pain. It was trapped, its immense weight working against it, its front half submerged in the churning, icy current. This was the moment of truth. The hunters swarmed forward. Ball was a whirlwind of controlled fury, his spear striking deep into the mammoth's thick hide at the joint of its foreleg. Phelan struck the other leg. The beast thrashed wildly, its tusks scything through the air, but its movements were hampered, its power negated by the trap of ice and water. Cale saw his opening. He circled around, his spear held low. The mammoth's terrified eye fixed on him. For a moment, he was frozen, mesmerized by the ancient intelligence in that gaze. He saw not a monster, but a magnificent creature fighting for its life. "Cale, now," Ball's voice cut through his hesitation. Cale lunged. He drove his spear with all the strength in his body, aiming for the vulnerable spot behind the shoulder, seeking the heart. The flint point bit deep. The mammoth let out a final, shuddering groan, a sound of immense world-ending sorrow. A tremor ran through its colossal body. Then, with a great slow sigh, the ice giant sank lower into the water, its lifeblood staining the snow and the ice a brilliant, shocking crimson. Silence fell over the valley, broken only by the gurgling of the river and the ragged, panting breaths of the hunters. Cale stood trembling, his spear still in his hands, his body slick with sweat, despite the freezing cold. He looked at the magnificent beast, now still and silent. He felt a profound, aching sadness mixed with the wild, exultant thrill of victory. He had done it. He had faced the ice giant and survived. He had become a hunter. In the sun-dappled silence of the pine forest, Marla's hand shot out, grabbing Lyra's arm with surprising strength. The silent command was absolute. Every member of the gathering party, from the oldest woman to the youngest child, froze in place, melting into the landscape. They became rocks, tree trunks, patches of shadow. They held their breath, their hearts a frantic drumming against their ribs. Lyra crouched behind a snow-dusted juniper bush, pulling her little cousin close. She peered through the branches. At first, she saw nothing. The forest was as it had been moments before, a silent, beautiful world of white snow, dark trunks, and the warm golden shafts of sunlight. Then she saw a flicker of movement. From the deep shadows between two ancient pines, a creature emerged. It was a female cave lion, a beast of terrifying grace and power. Her tawny, lightly spotted coat was a perfect camouflage against the snowy, sunlit ground. She was larger than any wolf, a solid mass of muscle and sinew that moved with a liquid, predatory confidence. She was not alone. A second, slightly smaller lion, a subadult, emerged from the shadows behind her. They were not hunting, they were simply moving through their territory. The mother lion paused, lifting her massive head to test the air. Her amber eyes, cold and intelligent, swept across the landscape. Lyra felt as though those eyes were looking directly at her, peeling back her cover, seeing the frantic, terrified beating of her heart. She squeezed her own eyes shut for a moment, convinced she had been seen. Marla crouched a few feet away, was as still as a granite boulder. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She knew what Lyra was just learning in a confrontation like this. Fear was the loudest sound you could make. Panic was a scent, a vibration in the air that a predator could feel. Their only weapon was absolute stillness, the hope that they could convince the great cats that they were nothing more than an uninteresting part of the landscape. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The younger lion, more curious and impatient, took a few steps forward, its head low, its tail twitching. It had caught their scent. It let out a low rumbling growl, a sound that vibrated deep in Lyra's chest. This was the most dangerous moment. The curiosity of the younger cat could provoke an attack, not out of hunger, but out of territorial aggression, or even playfulness, a playfulness that would be instantly fatal for any of the children. Marla slowly, deliberately, reached into the small pouch at her belt. Her movements were so measured they were almost imperceptible. She drew out a small, smooth, dark stone, a piece of hematite she used for grinding pigments. With an almost undetectable flick of her wrist, she tossed the stone a good distance away, to her left. The stone landed with a soft thump in the snow, a tiny insignificant sound, but in the profound silence of the forest, it was like a thunderclap. Both lions instantly swiveled their heads towards the sound, their bodies tensed, their focus completely shifted. The mother let out a soft chuff sound, a command to her offspring. The danger was not here, it was there. After a moment of staring intently at the spot where the stone had landed, the mother turned and, with a flick of her tail, continued on her path, the younger lion trotting obediently behind her. They moved past the hiding place of the gatherers, their powerful silent paws leaving deep prints in the snow. They were so close that Lyra could see the twitch of the muscles in their shoulders, could smell their wild musky scent. They did not even glance in their direction. Their minds were fixed on the phantom disturbance Marla had created. A few moments later, they had melted back into the forest shadows, as silent and as deadly as they had appeared. The clan members remained frozen for a long time after the lions had gone. No one moved until Marla slowly rose to her feet. The spell was broken. A collective shuddering sigh of relief rippled through the group. The children, who had been preternaturally still, began to cry softly. Their mothers hugged them close, their own bodies trembling. Lyra felt a wave of awe wash over her, a feeling even stronger than her fear. She had just witnessed a different kind of hunt, a different kind of battle. Marla had not used a spear or a stone axe. She had used her mind. She had used her deep understanding of the world, of the way a predator thinks. She had defeated the great cats with a single well-aimed stone, and a profound, unshakable calm. The lion hunts the body, Marla said, her voice quiet but firm, as she helped Lyra to her feet. But a quiet mind can hunt the lion's own thoughts. Remember that, little one. The sharpest weapon is not in your hand, it is behind your eyes. They gathered their baskets, their hands still shaking. The sun was beginning its long, slow descent towards the western mountains. It was time to return to the safety of the great cave. The forest no longer felt like a place of bounty and beauty. It felt charged with a new and terrible danger. They moved quickly now, their earlier meandering replaced by a single-minded purpose. They would bring back the life-giving roots and the firewood, but they would also bring back a story, a lesson in survival that was just as vital as any piece of food. They had faced the peril of the wild, and through wisdom and courage, they had endured. The sun was a bleeding wound on the horizon, its fading light painting the snow-covered mountains in hues of deep orange, pink and purple. The cold, no longer held at bay by the bright sunlight, was returning with a vengeance, its icy fingers probing and sharp. For the hunters, the work had only just begun. The ice giant was dead, but its body was a mountain of meat, hide and bone that had to be processed before the scavengers of the north. The wolves and wolverines were drawn by the scent of blood. The 5 men worked with a frantic, focused energy. They used their razor-sharp flint knives to make the first cuts into the mammoth's incredibly thick hide. It was grueling, bloody work. Their hands and arms were quickly slicked with warm, steaming blood that froze almost instantly in the frigid air. They worked as a team, each man knowing his task. Boar, the master butcher, directed the operation, his deep knowledge of the beast's anatomy guiding their cuts. They carved off huge slabs of meat and fat, the most precious prize. They carefully removed the internal organs, some of which would be eaten raw immediately, a vital infusion of warmth and energy. Kale worked alongside them, his earlier awe and sadness replaced by the grim necessity of the task. This was not a magnificent spirit anymore, it was food, it was life for the clan, it was his sister's survival, his mother's warmth. As they worked, they could hear the first, distant howls of wolves drawn by the irresistible scent. They would not have long. They worked by the fading light of the sky, their movements becoming a frantic race against the coming darkness and the gathering predators. They loaded as much of the meat and hide as they could onto makeshift sledges, crafted from the mammoth's own ribs and hide. The rest, they would have to leave behind. It was a painful but necessary sacrifice. The journey back was long, and they were already exhausted. They began the long, slow trek home, their bodies aching, their sledges heavy. The moon, a pale silver sliver, rose in the darkening sky, its faint light illuminating their path. They walked in silence, a small weary procession moving through a world that had become vast, dark and filled with unseen dangers. It was well after true dark when they saw it, a tiny flickering point of orange light in the distance, the heart fire, the great cave, home. A surge of relief and renewed strength went through Kale. At the same time, the gathering party was making their own return. They had entered the cave just as the last light of the sun had vanished, their baskets full, their bodies trembling with the lingering fear of their encounter with the lions. They were greeted with relief by the few elders who had remained behind. They added their firewood to the heart fire, making it blaze higher and brighter. The women began to prepare the roots and lichens, the meager but vital additions to the clan's diet. Lyra looked out from the mouth of the cave, her eyes searching the dark, empty plains for any sign of her brother. She saw nothing but the cold, indifferent stars. She sat by the fire, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. Malar came and sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They will return," she said, her voice full of a certainty that Lyra did not feel. And then, a shout from the watchman at the cave's entrance. The hunters were back. The clan erupted in a joyous clamor. They rushed to the entrance to see the 5 weary figures pulling their heavy, blood-soaked sledges. The sight of the mammoth meat, huge dark slabs of it, sent a wave of ecstatic relief through the clan. They would not starve. They would be strong for the coming moons of deepest winter. Kale was swarmed by his family. His mother hugged him, her face wet with tears. Lyra gripped his arm, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I was too," he admitted, his voice rough with exhaustion. That night, there was a great feast. The heart fire roared, its light filling every corner of the great cave. The smell of roasting mammoth fat, rich and intoxicating, filled the air. The clan ate until their bellies were full for the first time in many days. There was laughter, and stories were told. Boar recounted the hunt, his voice booming with pride as he described Kale's bravery. Malaa, in turn, told the story of the lions, her tale a quiet lesson in the power of wisdom over brute strength. Later, when the feast had died down, and the clan was settling into a warm, well-fed sleep, Kale took a piece of charcoal from the fire, and a lump of red ochre mixed with fat. He went to the sacred alcove, the walls of which were already covered with the painted ghosts of 100 past hunts. Under the watchful, silent gaze of Allah, the shaman, he began to draw. He drew the ice giant. He drew its massive curving tusks, its shaggy coat, its powerful legs. He was not just drawing a beast, he was telling a story. He was capturing the spirit of the animal, honoring its sacrifice. He was turning the brutal, bloody reality of the day into a memory, a legend that would be told around the hearth fire for generations to come. As he painted, he felt a profound sense of connection, a feeling of belonging that warmed him more than any fire. He was Kale of the Sunchaser clan. He was a hunter, and he was home. The cold was still out there, the great god of the ice world, but here in the warm firelit dark of the great cave, surrounded by his family, his clan, there was life. And for now, life was enough.